Welcome to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Lee Murray. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us all about herself and what she writes. So take it away.
Hi, Anisha. Thank you for having me back here at Author Interviews at Crystal Lake. It's lovely to be here. I'm a author, editor, essayist, screenwriter, and poet from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I won a few awards, and I'm reasonably well known in the horror community. And I have a few works coming from Crystal Lake, so I'm excited to be here to talk about those.
Okay. And we'll start with the two most recent anthologies, which are Shakespeare Unleashed and Never Wake, which is going to be out on September 8th. So tell us a little bit about the books, what the stories you wrote for them, and all the good stuff that the readers want to know about.
So my story in Shakespeare Unleashed is a story about the Winter's Tale. It's a retelling of that in a contemporary setting. So I've actually set my story in Hollywood. There's actually a fountain, I think, with actresses, and one of the actresses was damaged. The statue was damaged, and so that was kind of the inspiration for my story. So I used the Winter's Tale and the two nasty kings who basically thwarted, if you like, the queen, and she wasn't believed. She was accused of having an affair with her husband's best friend, and of course she didn't. And the best friend took off and didn't really support her, and she molded, and her son died, and it's quite a tragic story. And she ends up, her best friend makes her into a statue, so she's still around. And it's the statue that I tell the story about, and I've used a couple of sonnets to give her voice. So it was really fun to write. I think the book is coming out in Italian. I think Independent Legions are doing that. So I really do not know how they're going to manage with a story and the sonnets translating it, because I don't think it's going to be that easy to translate a sonnet into Italian, but we shall see. So they're very talented over there, so let's hope that comes out well and is well received.
Yeah, well, I think Shakespeare himself has been translated probably into Italian, so I would assume that they have some expertise in translating his sonnets as well.
You would think so. You would think so. So I'm very excited about it. It was a really fun story to write. And it's always nice to be invited to these things, a little bit lucky. And of course, when an editor of an anthology comes to you and says, would you like to be involved? And they already give you the prompt, then it's really rather nice. You've got some guidance. If you get asked to write a story, anything you like, that can be quite hard because it's such a big topic, and it's hard to know what will fit in with the other work. So this time I was given the Winter's Tale. I was the only person, actually I chose the Winter's Tale because I got on early, and so that one hadn't been taken yet. So it was really nice to have write a little revenge story and know that no one else was dealing with that particular play. So yeah, but it's always hard when you're invited, because you also feel like you've really got to write yourself out of your skin and do the very best possible story that you can, that's going to be different and stand out and be just something a little bit unique within a collection of, and in this case, some absolutely stupendous writers. So I felt very privileged to be involved and very excited about that anthology. I think it's done very well already, and I think there was a very big Kickstarter, so people were really keen to see that anthology come out and see those kind of horror takes on Shakespeare.
Yeah, I would think there's a very specific pressure when you've been asked to write for an anthology as opposed to when you're just submitting to one.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
So what about your story for Never Wake? What's it about?
Yeah, I'm going to hold this up because I absolutely love this anthology's cover. Isn't it beautiful?
Oh
It's
yeah,
just so surreal, and the colours are just fantastic. And I've actually got a signed copy, so Ken has signed mine. And so I feel very, very lucky. I picked this one up at StokerCon, and I've got it ahead of the launch date, so it feels really, really, really nice. And my story in here is called The 7 Year War. This is a book of dream stories. And yeah, also I also was invited to this one and up again, up with some absolutely incredible writers. And so that story is, I kind of looked into the whole locked in syndrome, that idea of being asleep but actually being awake, and also sleeping within those locked in syndrome, because you wouldn't necessarily know whether a person was sleeping or not. I don't think. Well, I guess they could manage. I guess they could look at brain patterns. But anyway, it was super exciting. I did a lot of research, and that particular work was Tuckerized. So Bridget D. Brave paid a little bit of money towards the production of the book in order to have her name in a story. And it was what a neat name. She's an author herself and very good writer. And but what a wonderful name to Tuckerize in a story. And so the story kind of has two threads. It sort of has the locked in thread and the internal thought of the character, but also their dream sequences. And I took a sort of medieval adventure tale in that, and the character takes on a whole different world, because there is no world in the existing world for this person who is in locked in syndrome. And then I put a nice little twist on the end. So I hope people will enjoy it. I think Bridget enjoyed it. It's nice to be. It's always nice to read a story where someone kills you off brutally, and it's quite fun to see how people play with you when the character is named after you. So. And that's something actually that readers might like to do. Look out for those kinds of projects that are being promoted ahead of time. And the Kickstarters, they're the sort of thing that and anthologists do in order to make sure that writers are paid properly from the get-go. So it's always nice to support those projects ahead of time, and then you're going to get your copy, and often there are these lovely rewards that you can get as well, and Tuckerizing is often one of those. So I think some of the other stories will feature real people's names used as characters in this book. So it's always nice. I think I've had my name Tuckerized before, and it's really quite special. You feel a real connection to those stories. So yeah. So, and actually, while we're talking about Kickstarters, we should probably talk about the Indiegogo campaign that I think Crystal Lake is a part of, which
Yeah.
supports a lot of smaller indie presses again, and that's all about making sure writers are paid professional rates for their work wherever possible, and getting out great anthologies, which are super sampler for new writers and existing writers. So if you're someone who's new to horror, or you're just looking around to find someone else new to read that you haven't sampled before, then anthologies are fantastic for that, because you can just dip in and read a few and decide, oh, I really love this story by this person, and I can go and discover the rest of their body of work, which to me is it's a no-brainer, right? So you get this wonderful book of fantastic stories, and you can discover lots of new writers, or you can just enjoy a story by someone that you've already enjoyed before. So I think they're great projects. They're certainly wonderful for community building. Just being part of something like this. Of course, I think I did a panel with Sina Paleo, and she's just a fantastic Latino writer. So she just got Puerto Rico, and she just got a Bram Stoker earlier this year for poetry. So it's really nice to be, involved in a project with these other writers. It's always fabulous. I feel
Yeah.
very privileged, to be
Yeah.
honest.
And yeah, I have a problem with Kickstarter campaigns. I'm always constantly sharing them. So I have a little Kickstarter addiction. I've
Well,
actually,
I mean, you get in on the ground floor. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I always like to share the Kickstarter campaigns or the other, when the other fundraisers as well, because it's always, nice to get people's aware of these things and help support the author community. And I've donated to a few recently myself, including a, one that got funded within a few days, author friend of mine. So that was nice to see.
It is nice to see, and it's a shame that publishing needs to do this because
Mm,
they are expensive to run, to put together, especially a production as beautiful as this, And I mean,
yeah,
Crystal Lake does do absolutely stunning productions, and I think that's you want a quality book when you're putting together, a fantastic lineup of really engaging stories. You really do need to do it justice and put the effort into making a beautiful production, and Crystal Lake certainly does that. There's no question. So
yeah,
I'm all for supporting those things, and often it's nice too because you're seeing emerging writers come through with some more established names, and obviously it's the more established names that will sell the anthology, but it's a real opportunity for emerging writers to be seen and visible and be welcomed into the community. So
yeah,
I do see anthologies really as being community projects and building, critical mass, if you like, to make a really healthy horror community. So we've got lots of fresh voices coming through.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I've been involved in a few anthologies myself and a couple of Kickstarter projects to fund them as well, for a couple of the anthologies. So yeah, and and you can find the link to that Indiegogo campaign down in the description if you want to support it, as well as the books we'll be discussing today as well. So, and speaking of books, you've also been a part of another Crystal Lake anthology. There is no death, there are no dead, which is a great title, by the way. And
I love the
so tell
title.
us,
Yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit about that and your story.
That story is that it's in this book here, isn't it gorgeous? And we're just talking about productions, but this is just I love the cover art for this, just stunning. And it's edited by Aaron French and Jess Landry. And of course, when they reached out to me, I mean, they're very well known in our community as being excellent editors and good writers in their own right. So I was very excited to be invited to that one. And I asked, I reached out to Jess and I said, would you be interested in something very New Zealand? Would you be opposed to that? And they said, of course, that would be wonderful. We'd love to hear your views. And so in Auckland City, there's a cemetery that was originally in the middle of town. Well, it's still in the middle of town, but it was on a big plot in the centre of the city. And then the city has grown up around it. So Auckland City is our biggest city in New Zealand, and it's over 1 million people, and there's only 5 million in the whole of the country. So it's become quite a sort of sprawling metropolis, and lots of different flyways and what have you. And that particular cemetery has been chopped up and moved around, and the plots have been moved and some of them were lost, and it's quite traumatic and for some of the families, and particularly Maori families, which all those cemeteries, often we've lost the names for many of them, so it's really rather tragic. And it still exists in this kind of weird sort of kind of pocket of land right in the middle of town, but most of it has been divided up, and there are now you know highways and what have you on it. And so that kind of was an inspiration for this, and this little, and also the notion in Maori culture of your wairua spirit, your soul, stepping off North Island at Spirits Bay, which is at Cape Reinga at the very north of the island, and swimming off to and swimming and heading off to Hawaii, or the home of the spiritual ancestors. And so I kind of I kind of leaned into that wonderful mythology, which is very beautiful, with a story about a boy who is a matakite and who grows up not knowing what that means. And then he discovers it when he's very ill and close to dying, that what that actually means for him. So again, it leans into this whole idea of there is no death and there are no dead. And I really enjoyed writing. It was really rather special. And again, always nice to be invited and have that guidance of this is the kind of story we're looking for, and then hoping that my story will be different. And of course, as the only New Zealand writer on the lineup that sort of gave me that little bit of an edge to do something a little different that perhaps hadn't been seen by sort of broader horror audiences. So, I do feel very privileged when I get invited, and I feel a kind of, not a responsibility, but a need, if you like, to bring the sort of folklore and myths and some of those sort of the character of New Zealand into my stories, so that the rest of the world can read those. Because unfortunately, there's just not enough. There's not enough New Zealand horror out there, and so I always try to bring some if I can.
Yeah, I've been starting to do that with my own home province of Nova Scotia here in Canada as well. Just sort of write stories set in the province and bring in some of the folklore and the ghost stories that we have, which because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think Anne of Green Gables, everyone thinks of the Nova,
That's actually
that,
Prince Edward Island, but
yeah, it's Prince Edward Island, but it's like, oh, it's over there somewhere, and that's kind of and I
yeah.
think it's great. It's important to bring those kinds of different distinctive geographical features into our writing, and just actually tell the stories that are local to home. And I love that. I absolutely love that. I think it just brings something special to a story when you can bring that local flavor to it. Just offers something unique.
Mm. So, you've also written forewords for anthologies, including an upcoming one. So, tell us about doing that, how it differs from actually writing a story, and if you have any tips for authors who've been asked to write one.
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. Well, firstly, it's a privilege. It's always a privilege to be asked to, here's a sneak peek um, at our anthology, and these we've worked really hard on bringing this together and creating a journey through the book for readers, and then you get a sneak peek and a chance to comment on the nature of the work, but also on how it came about and why you've been asked. And so, I've done a large number of these, and I often look at how do I know the author, and what I feel their branding is, or what their intent is, firstly for their work, and also overall for the community. So I always feel like those just such a privilege to write, and also, that sneak peek, of course, it's always nice to have that first look in the box, of course. So, yes, this particular book is a book that Joe Meinhardt of Crystal Lake is editing for Hellbound Books. And to be quite frank, I have not received the manuscript yet, so I have not done it yet. So I'm hoping it's like totally new. I believe Joe is right in the process of editing those now, and so he's asked me for a forward, and I'm looking forward to reading that manuscript. And it's an unthemed anthology, so that is particularly tricky. I mean, I'm an anthologist myself, so when you get an unthemed anthology, it's really tricky. That it will be important to place the stories in a way which is a sort of logical or thematic, or some kind of means of guiding, if you like, the reader through the various stories. And so what you don't want is two very long stories, or two stories about the similar topic, or close together. You want to sort of create a journey which is logical, or at least has some resonance, so that sometimes you want a quieter story, so you don't want too many very high impact stories close together, so that the reader gets a sort of palate cleanser in between. So it's quite a tricky thing. And I know readers think, oh, well, I read this, and it was fine. But often there's quite a process for the anthologist to think, how will you order them? What's the right? And also that impacts the editing. And of course, which stories go in and which stories don't make it. And sometimes that's absolutely heartbreaking as an anthologist. Oh, I really love the story, but it just doesn't quite fit with the flavor of the other stories that we've got come in. And it may not be anything to do with quality. It just may be someone else has addressed a similar topic. And when you're asking for unthemed stories, then the topics can often be the same or similar, because we're all living in this world and various things are happening at the same time. So, for example, we've got the Ukraine war going on, and that, lots of people are impacted by that. So you may get one or two stories of the same nature, because people are watching the news and seeing things and impacted. Pandemic fiction was a really good example. We were all looking at isolation and those kinds of very real issues that were occurring during the pandemic. So although the anthology will be unthemed, it will still end up with a theme of sorts, because people aren't living in a vacuum, and writers will write the things that are resonating for them in the moment. So I'm really looking forward to it, actually, and I do find it, it's still work, but it's such enjoyable work, because it's why should anyone think it's important to hear what you have to say? Just dive straight into the story. So it's almost like you're being asked to write a teaser for why readers should read on. And that's often the thing that people see on Amazon. They don't have to pay for that bit, so they can see the little bit, and that's also sort of serves as a little bit of a teaser. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, as a reader, I can say I do tend to read the samples of a book that I'm interested in just to get the flavor of the writing, because it's if I don't know the author, I need to know the flavor of the writing if I'm going to enjoy it or not. And I can
Yeah.
usually tell
Yeah.
from, especially if there's a forward or or even the first page, because I mean, and then that usually decides me whether I'm going to buy it or not. So yeah.
Absolutely. And it's usually from someone you trust in the
Mm,
community. So if you see a forward, Lisa Morton's just written a forward to an anthology that I'm putting out next month. And, when you see a forward from Lisa Morton, you think, oh, okay, if she's written a forward and she thought that this was a good
mm,
piece of work, then you can kind of trust them.
yeah.
And that's why, of course, it's such a privilege that anyone would think that I have something to say. But it is nice, Lisa's readers will say, okay, well, we know what Lisa likes and the kinds of things that Lisa supports, and so we'll go with this. This might be worth something. This might be something that I might like to read, and I hope, and that's really it's quite an honor to be thought of as someone who has a voice in the community that people will listen to. So when I'm asked to do a forward, it's like, oh, that I might be someone that people might like to listen to. So it's very flattering, of course.
Yeah. Okay. And so you've also been on the other side of the anthology, as your previous answer indicated, as an editor. So what is that like as opposed to being a writer? And how did you get involved in editing anthologies?
Ah, yeah. How did I get involved? Well, to be honest, that started from that whole, an author is not an island. No story happens in a vacuum. You always get other readers on. And so when I was learning to write and starting out, I just shared critiques with lots of people, and so I critiqued lots of my colleagues. Um, and I obviously have some editing skills, but also I did a lot of that work, because when you critique other people's work, you learn a lot about your own and where the flaws are in your own. And so that was really helpful. And I just got a bit of a reputation as being a good editor, and having an eye for seeing, where things could be developed or strengthened. And so I kind of fell into, if you like, doing some work like that for communities like Spec for KenZ, which is New Zealand's speculative community, and the Australian Horror Writers Association, and a number of other organisations, and also did about 20 for youth, which is interesting, because working with youth is quite a different feel than working with adults. You have to be so careful not to tread on their dreams, and oh my goodness, they get so hung up on where the comma is, things
Oh,
like
well,
that.
don't talk to me about comments, please. Comments. No, no.
So yeah, so I kind of so, and in some ways to me editing is a little more of a natural thing. I guess I'm a bit of a cheerleader, and I like to support my colleagues, and so and also they're such community projects. They just bring together people who are talking about things that they're all interested in, and for promotion and that kind of thing. So they're really big community building projects. So being involved with, for example, SpecFic NZ, and I've done edited a number of anthologies for them, and also with my colleague Dan Raybarts, we've done a number of across the ditch anthologies with our Australian colleagues. And we did one called Baby Teeth early on, which was flash fiction, little horror tales, which was super fun. And that was completely a community project. So I got involved like that. And then it came along, and I've done a number of them, and I've done a couple on my own that have run some awards, including Hell Hole, which is a sort of anthology of I'm going to say military horror, but obviously based around caves and holes in the ground, and on the moon and various places under the sea. So Rena Mason actually won a Bram Stoker Award for her story in that collection. And then Black Cranes came along, and I know you just mentioned that, and that was an anthology of horror by Asian women from Asian diaspora women. So, and telling their stories, which was just hugely refreshing because nothing had been done of the like. And so, and that went on to win the Shirley Jackson Award and the Bram Stoker Award, and was shortlisted for, I think, 5 other awards. So, really sort of hit the mark, possibly again because it was around the time of the pandemic, and there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, and so I think people were looking to sort of understand a bit more and read a bit more and understand why there was this sentiment circulating, and so and perhaps push back, at that and say we don't agree. So that particular work, it's just been here's the new cover. It's just been re-released as a hardcover by my friends at Raw Dog Screaming Press. So that book was edited by Genevieve Flynn and myself, and that was really different because Genevieve brings just so many different skills to the party. She's just a really, really talented editor and author, and we the journey I was talking about into an anthology, we did this completely differently because we actually used sort of some Asian myth and superstition in order to order the book. So my story, Phoenix Claws, mentions the number 4, which means death in Chinese and Cantonese, and so we put that at number 4. And Rena's Mason's tale story is called The Ninth Tale. It's about a fox spirit, and fox spirits get a new tale when they have a new iteration in their shape-shifting life and become a new person. So of course, when you get a story that's called The Ninth Tale, then we made that the ninth tale. And so we used quite a different approach, and then of course we had to fit this other stories in according to some of those more traditional ways of creating a journey through the anthology. I know lots of readers don't do that. They just dip in to it, and that's fine too. That's absolutely fine. Readers can read however they want. They can go to the last story in the book if they want to, and they can do whatever they like. But I always read from start to finish because I know that the anthologists think very carefully about how they order the journey through the anthology. So yes, I think I've done I'm going to say 24 maybe now, or something like that of anthologies. So some for youth and some in the Asian diaspora and horror area, and some in poetry. And this year's was essay, my first time, an essay collection, Unquiet Spirits, which follows on from Black Cranes, and again, Asian diaspora women talking about horror mythology, and how the impact on their lives. So this one came out from Black Spot Books in February.
Yes, and it was very good, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I read that and left a review on it. So, I also there was also a poetry book in that collection too, Tortured Willows, if I'm
Ye
recalling.
This one? Yes, this one was written, this one also won a Bram Stoker Award. This was just incredibly empowering for me. I wrote it with Christina Singh, Angela Eureka Smith, and Genevieve Flynn, and it was a follow-on to Black Cranes because we just had so much more to say. And it's just on that topic of how monsters and myth and these metaphors for how we live our lives are placed on Asian women and the kinds of expectations, those traditional ideas, and also trying to navigate contemporary Western society. Those ideas were still, because they resonated so much with people, readers. When we put Black Cranes out, we thought, oh, we still have so much to say, we need to do something different. And Angela and Christina, who are very accomplished poets, both of them, they said to Genevieve and I, well, we could do this. You could do this. It'll be fine. You can do it. And I'm just Genevieve and I are just baby poets. And but they gave us the confidence and some strategies for going forward. And the four of us put together this collaborative collection of poems about our experience. So Angela's looked particularly at her Shimanshu heritage, which is those Okinawa islands, which are invaded, of course, by the US and Japan, and the historical implications of that, and also the sort of personal response. So that was hugely revelatory, I think, for her, and a turning point in her career because now so much of her work focuses on that. In fact, I'm going to say that for all of us. Um, Christina's work looks particularly in Torches Willows, looks particularly at domestic abuse and abuse of women, and she did a lot of research, spoke to a lot of people, and so her story, her poems are particularly poignant in this collection. Genevieve and I are both learning to be poets, really just trying to get confidence and sort of gain some ground as poets. But we both looked into our own personal stories, mine about, Asian women, the Chinese women coming to New Zealand, and things like the poll tax and the sort of expectations on Asian women here, which were, their lives were so limited. And my mother's story, of course. And then Genevieve did the same with her Malaysian experience, coming from Malaysia and moving to Australia. So yeah, we've been very lucky. The reception to those different forms, both the stories, the poems, and now the essays, has been really incredible. We're I'm just very lucky to be able to have a voice in the community and have my stories and poems picked up, and publishers have been very supportive. Publishers like Crystal Lake and all of those smaller presses. I think I'm going to say of those presses in the Indiegogo campaign that we're asking people to support today, I think I've been published by almost all of them. So I've got to be very grateful for small press for taking risks, and because they take risks to put out work that from our horror community that the bigger publishers not necessarily taking. So it's very important for career building and for the health of our community.
Yeah, definitely. So, what is it about writing short stories that you enjoy the most?
Well, I'm a really slow writer, so I think the fact is that short stories I can finish, because I don't think I've written a novel in about 4 years because there's so much happening. So, and also I think, often when it comes to an anthology call or a magazine call, often there's a theme, and that really is a great start point for me, because there are so many ideas. How do you choose one? And a novel is a whole year's work for me. So when you're asked to write a short story, that's something I can do in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, or it always takes quite a lot of time. The writing might not. It might only take 3 or 4 days to write the actual story, but the thinking takes time, because you
Mm,
obviously don't want to write the first thing that comes to mind, because it's probably the first thing that's come to mind for half a dozen other people as well. So short story it's a very succinct form. You can't waste time. You need to start very close to the action and finish as soon as you can after the denouement and the climax of the story. So it does take a little bit of, I'm going to say, sort of discipline in order, to write a tight story that's within the word count, prescribed by the editor or the publisher, and it's a tight form that allows for so much. It allows for us to explore really interesting and ideas that perhaps wouldn't fill a whole novel. Because for a novel, obviously, you need more than one small idea to cover to get through a whole novel. So, yeah, I love it as a form. I think it's very exciting. It's a great place to sample new writers. You don't have to invest in a whole novel, which is several hours of your life. You can just read a short story over your morning tea time, which I think is, my favorite way to read a short story. I try and do that every morning tea, grab an anthology, read another one. I always talk about them as being the kind of chocolate box of writing, because you can sample um, in a short time and get a feel for an author's voice and whether or not you like their writing. So
mm. Yeah, and short stories are very versatile in a lot of ways too for
mm.
publishing, because you can publish them yourself as a collection. You can submit to anthologies, and I'm currently publishing an actual series of short stories, which is going over quite well. So I'm glad about that. But
Well
uh,
done. Yeah, that's a great. I think that whole, story. You can see a number of people are now doing stories in novel and flash fiction,
mm,
or a novel and story. So I think Gabino Iglesias's Coyote Songs is actually a series of short stories, and which come together as a novel. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and it's something you can invest in, isn't it? You can write one story, and a novel which is sort of woven with subplots is a lot to hold in your head, whereas a short story, you can
mm,
write that, and then you can write the next one and the next one, and it becomes it has some other intricacies, doesn't it, Anita? Because if you're trying to keep a long story arc going through, that can be tricky. But I think it's an exciting form to be able to write a novel and stories. So good for you.
yeah, yeah. I kind of like interconnecting short stories when you're doing, like, say, a series, or you're doing, like, I did a little. It's kind of a little novella where it's 12 short stories, but it tells one longer story
Mm,
as well,
mm.
which is always fun. Very tricky to do, but very fun. But so, yeah, I find short stories can be a lot of you can do a lot of interesting things with them. So, how do you want readers to feel after reading your stories?
Something. You want them to feel something, and whether it's disgust or horror or excitement or hope, or you just want them to feel something. I mean, that's the job of a writer, is to provoke thought, and to you want them to be entertained and engaged, and maybe to say, hey, I read the story and it was cool, it was something. You want them to feel something, so you would hope that when they've read it, they feel invigorated, something, because that is our job, to make people feel something and touch them in some way, to have the story resonate. And not every story will resonate for every person, because we bring our own experience. You would
Mm,
hope that the reader will recognize themselves or something from their own lives in your story, that there's some universality to it, or I don't know if that's a word, but you would just hope that they feel something, and that you have somehow touched them or left them um, thinking, transformed in some way. I mean, that would be the ideal, isn't it? You would want the reader to be transformed in the same way that your protagonist is transformed in the story.
yeah.
So, but how is kind of up to the reader, isn't it? We put out the best story we can. on the topic or the subject in question, and we hope that it will resonate for readers. Now, we know it's not going to resonate for everyone, but we hope that somehow through our crafting and the words we've chosen, the imageries we've used, will somehow reach our reader and pluck some feeling from them, and encourage them to read more or to do their own research or to talk about it, to open a dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing about anthologies, though, is because um, not every story, like you said, may hit with the reader, but you've got a better chance of at least one story in that anthology really coming away and giving the reader something to think about, and possibly more than one as well. Because usually when I read an anthology, there's probably one or two stories that I enjoy, but they don't really stay with you for whatever reason. I mean, they're not necessarily bad stories, they're just not something
Yeah,
that you
they just
connect with.
don't necessarily connect with your own personal
Yeah,
experience,
but
perhaps.
there's always that one in the anthology that go, "Wow, I
Yeah,
really like
yeah,
that one."
totally, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually recently read an anthology last year, at the end of last year, called The Alchemy of Sorrow. And those stories, I think actually every one of them hit with me because they were so fabulous in that particular anthology. That was my favorite book last year. But anyway, so speaking of favorites, which story that you've written holds a favorite place in your heart?
Oh yeah, I always struggle with this question, Nita, because as I say, it's always the one that I've,
Yeah,
yet to write. Yeah,
yeah.
because
You
I
never
feel
want
like
to pick your favorite child. Are you one of those writers? Are you?
yeah, and I just always
Okay.
think that the next one is going to be better, and every time I'm hoping and striving to write that unique piece of writing that would connect with with everyone and say something special, and be one of those groundbreaking books. So I really hope so. So the book, I've got a book coming out next March from the Cuba Press, which won the Laura Solomon Cuba Press Prize here in New Zealand, for creative and innovative and work with a unique vision. So, which just blew me away when I won that award. And that's not even out yet. But I feel I wrote this particular piece of writing in the pandemic. I won a little residency for it. And unfortunate for I'm going to mention the Grimshaw Sargent Trust. Thank you very much for supporting me. But at the time, Auckland was in lockdown, which was where the residency was placed, and so I had to come home. So I missed the entire residency section of the residency, because I had to come home because of the pandemic, and it was an extremely difficult piece of writing. Um, it's prose poetry, so it's about 25,000 words, and it includes a poem from Tortured Willows, a little poem, and it also includes from Frangipani Wishes from Black Cranes. But um, it looks at Asian women's experience in New Zealand, or Chinese women specifically, and it takes archival histories of women and weaves them together, and I see each woman through the lens of the fox spirit, the Asian fox spirit myth. So I don't know if people are very familiar with this, but the fox spirit lives is a shapeshifter, and she must go through, or usually a she, go through different iterations of her life. So living other people's lives by putting their skulls on the top of her head, and her goal is to get to the celestial palace in the sky. So she has to go through these lives in order to achieve that. And so these stories are quite horrific of the lives that some women have lived in this country. So over history. So it was personal and also political and also, I hope, powerful. So I'm quite nervous. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever written, partly because of that pandemic and partly because of the subject matter. And also I was trying to do something a little different. So I hope it will resonate. I'm really excited about it. So when I say that's my favorite, it's probably not my favorite, but well, it is and it isn't, because it's the next thing to come, and
Yeah,
I'm hoping different enough and will speak to lots of people. So we'll see. We'll just
yeah.
how
It's
do
your
you know?
favorite.
Is a
It's
Yeah.
your favorite for now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not. It's just it's all they're all so different. I try to write widely and I try to dabble in all sorts of different approaches in order to give my work, that freshness and innovation. And so, well, look, we just have to keep striving, don't we, to write the best we possibly can.
Okay. So has any story you've written surprised you in, say, a way a character took a turn or the ending didn't come out the way you had planned?
Oh, they almost always do, don't they? They don't
That's true.
always, they almost always surprise you in some way, and you go down some rabbit hole. And, oh, this is interesting. Um, when I wrote Into the Ashes, which is one of my Tane McKenna novels, and that's a story that kind of has the fear really is in the whole idea of the big earthquake that is one day going to happen here in New Zealand and wipe us all out. So Lake Taupo in the middle of the country, which is the place where Maui's fish hook, um, basically Maui fished up in the North Island, is the lake, and the lake is massive and cold and deep and beautiful. But on either side of the lake is a range of on one side is the range of mountains with Ruapehu and Tongariro and Ngauhoi. And then at the far end of the lake, where the town is a lake called Tauhara, and the story is that Pihanga, which is the female mountain at one end of the lake, was in love with Tauhara, Tauhara, and in fact, but he was beaten out by the bigger mountain Tongariro, who claimed her as his wife. And he's mourning. He doesn't look. So the story is about these mountains warring or pining for one another, and the people have to just live within this, this terrible drama that's playing out with the earthquake happening and people having to evacuate. And in all of that, there's actually a prison and a prison break and some nasty things happening. But one of the really interesting things that surprised me was at the same time I was writing, there was a major eruption in Hawaii, and they were talking about olivine, which is a type of volcanic rock, which is a little bit like punamu or greenstone jade, and which was thrown out of the mountain and found in different places. Now, olivine is not necessarily especially precious, but it does look like jade, and someone mentioned it being like the mountain's tears, and I thought that was just wonderful because here I've got my two mountains on either end of the lake, and the mountain is pining for, Pihanga, the female mountain, is pining for her former lover, and wants him to acknowledge her and have these lovely. So my character happens to have a piece of olivine in his shoe, and that is the proof that the mountain is still sends her love to her former lover because she's got this teardrop in his shoe. So that was a little bit of oddness that just happened because I was watching the news and reading around this earthquakes and eruptions and what have you when I wrote the story. So that was
Mm,
fun.
yeah, it's a cool little additive too to the story. So, what do you like to do when you're not writing? Do you have any hobbies or hidden talents?
No hidden talents. I'm not a good cook, and I like to avoid the housework. I do a little bit of painting. I do enjoy painting. Poetry is, it's still writing, but it's a form of writing that you can do anywhere. So I do like poetry. Occasionally, I do love to walk my dog and walk with my husband, and we like to go caravanning. I know that sounds very old-fashioned, but we just love it. We just love going. New Zealand's full of gorgeous wild places and little campgrounds and spaces where you can park your caravan and just look right out at the ocean. And so we do love those weekends away in the caravan. They're just really special. You can sort of get off the grid and just eat simply and look at the view and go for nice walks. So yeah, those are the things I do.
Okay, so what's next for you? What's your upcoming projects?
Well, Neverwake comes out on I think the 8th, so that'll be the next thing in the queue that comes out from Crystal Lake Publishing. So excited to see the response to that book. Um, Also have a novella coming from Absinthe Books, which is UK PS Publishing and Print, and that was edited by UK editor author Maria O'Regan. So really exciting about that. It's a cosmic horror novella set on the Dardanelles Peninsula during World War One, and it's I'm going to have trouble saying this word, epistolary
Oh,
style book, and I'm super excited about it. It's got a Greg Chapman cover. Pat's one of my favorites, which is saying a lot because I think Greg has done 7 or 8 of my covers now. Super, super pleased that PS Publishing was open to that, and I said, "Oh, I've worked with Greg before," and they said, "Okay," and commissioned a gorgeous cover from him. So yeah, it's not it's historical horror, but it's also quieter horror. So I'm hoping it will resonate with people because it's there's a lot being written about. Anzac Cove and Gallipoli. But I thought that this was just a nice, a different take. So
yeah. Well, historical horror is one of my favorites to write and read, so I'll look for that one. Anyway, so well, I think we'll wrap the interview up here. I'd like to thank you for being a guest today. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
it's wonderful to have chatted with you. I think I've rabbited on for quite a long time now, Anita. But look, I hope people will support that Indiegogo campaign for those lovely indie publishers who are supporting our community so well, and also pick up a copy of Never Wake, which is out next week. And thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and just tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
You can find me at leemurray.info.
Okay, and that's it for this interview, and bye for now.